I am Al Gore. I used to be the next president of the United States of America. I don't think that's particularly funny. But put yourselves in my position for a moment. I flew on Air Force 2 for 8 years. Now I have to take off my shoes to get on an airplane. Just one quick story about what that emotional whiplash was like. Not long after I left my job in the White House some years back, my wife Tipper and I were driving from our home in Nashville, Tennessee to a little farm we have 50 miles to the east. And we were driving ourselves. I know that sounds like a little thing to most of you. But I looked in the rearview mirror and all of a sudden it just hit me. There was no motorcade out there. You've heard of phantom limb pain? This was a rented Ford Taurus, and it was close to dinner time, so we got off of the Interstate 40, and we started looking for a place to eat dinner. And we found a Shoney's restaurant, low-cost family restaurant chain. We walked in, sat down at the booth. The waitress came over, made a big commotion over Tipper. And then she took our order and went to the couple in the booth seated next to us, and she lowered her voice so much I had to really strain to hear what she was saying. And she said, "Yes, that's former Vice President Al Gore and his wife Tipper." And the man said, "He's come down a long way, hasn't he?" So the very next day, continuing an absolutely true story, I flew to Africa, to Nigeria, to make a speech in the city of Lagos on energy policy. And I started my speech there in Africa by telling the story about what had happened the day before in Tennessee, and pretty much the same terms I've used in telling it to you. Tipper and I were driving ourselves, Shoney's low-cost family restaurant chain, what the man said. And they laughed, and I went on and gave my speech and then headed back to the airport to fly back home. And I fell asleep on the plane until in the middle of the night, they landed on the Azores Islands out in the Atlantic for refueling. And they opened the door of the plane, and after I woke up, I went out to get some fresh air, and to my surprise, there was a man waving a piece of paper, running toward the planes, yelling, "Call Washington! Call Washington!" And I thought to myself, here we are in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, the middle of the night, what in the world could be wrong in Washington? And then I remembered it could be a bunch of things. But what it turned out to be was that one of the wire service reporters in Nigeria had already written a story about my speech there that had already been printed all across the United States. I've got at least 100 copies of this story. And my staff was extremely concerned because the story began, former Vice President Al Gore announced in Nigeria yesterday, quote, "My wife Tipper and I have opened a low-cost family restaurant named Shoney's, and we're running it ourselves." Before I could get back to U.S. soil, these late-night television comedians, Jay Leno and David Letterman, who are sometimes not very funny, if I must say so, had already just had a field day with this, and one of them had me in a big chef's hat, scribbling and yelling at me, "One more cheeseburger with fries." 3 days later, I got a nice long handwritten letter from my friend and former partner Bill Clinton saying, "Congratulations on the new restaurant." Oh, that letter will be on eBay later. Not really. Now I'm a recovering politician on about step 9. And it seems like a long time since I've been. Y'all are so young, you know. I had an experience recently. I was with one of my business partners, and a woman came walking by this table in the restaurant just staring at me as she walked past. And I didn't think anything about it until out of the corner of my eye I saw her coming from the opposite direction, just staring at me. And so, to be polite, I looked up and said, "How do you do?" And she said, "You know, if you dyed your hair black, you would look just like Al Gore." like him too. That's a great impression.